What's the point of starting my own podcast? This is the number one question that I hear from my clients, I hear from my community, and I hear across the board. Why should I start my own podcast when the market is oversaturated? Why should I start my own podcast when there's already somebody else who's talking about the specific thing that I want to talk about? Why should I start my own podcast? Because nobody knows who I am, so they're not going to listen to me anyways. These are the questions that I hear on a daily basis when I help other entrepreneurs start, grow, and monetize their shows. So I thought about this question myself, and I thought about why I wanted to start this podcast. The answers to all of those questions will be found on this channel throughout this series and in all the content that we get to create together. In these episodes, you're going to understand exactly why you should be starting your podcast, even if you feel like nobody is going to listen. I want to welcome you and thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. This is the official first video if you're watching on YouTube and audio if you're listening to it on the podcast apps of the As It Relates to Podcasting show. This series is super special to me, and I know you're going to find it so beneficial as we really get into the content. I wanted to create this monthly co-hosted series because I really felt like there was this gap in the market that, yes, there are so many amazing podcasts out there, and there are so many amazing channels that teach you about podcasting and all of the specifics. But sometimes I find those to be a little bit surface level. Sometimes I find that they don't actually give you all of the information that you need to get going on your podcasting journey. This is why I've invited the industry's best of the best to join me every single week on the podcast. We're talking about so many different topics. We're talking about the foundations of podcasting. We're talking about how to get your YouTube channel going. We're talking about paid ads. We're talking about organic marketing. We're talking about TikTok, Instagram, Reels, you name it. If there's something you want to learn, just drop it in the comments so I can see it and then we can address it. As a reminder, if you want access to ad-free versions of this podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Join us there. All the ad-free versions will be there. And you actually get access to all the content of the month in advance. So the episodes are released on a weekly basis. If you join our Patreon, you will access all of those episodes at the same time at the beginning of the month, so you can binge listen to everything and implement it right away. You don't have to wait a month to get going on your show. You can find the link to that below and in the show notes. Okay, so before we get into it, I really want to highlight some of my journey for you because we all start somewhere. You might be watching or listening to this right now and thinking, oh, it's just so difficult. It's so challenging. The tech is so hard. It's so confusing. It's so overwhelming. But really, at the end of the day, we all start at that same place. So I wanted to highlight some of what I've been through, some of the experiences that I've had today, and you'll hear them throughout the series, all the different series that we have on the show. But I felt that it was really important because I wanted you to know that it's okay to be where you are right now, wherever you are in your journey is perfect, and it's exactly where you're meant to be. Before we get into it, my name is Simona Costantini, and I own a podcast production agency that helps entrepreneurs start, grow, and monetize their show. My agency is called Costantini Productions, and I run my company out of my home. I have an amazing team that helps me. We do everything from content creation to all of the editing to all of the uploads and all of the growth and monetization strategy. Now, I do not say this to humble brag. I say this because I do have an idea of what I'm talking about, and I know that I can help you grow your show. My team and I produce more than 20 podcasts on a weekly basis. And so I've definitely learned a thing or two when it comes to producing a podcast that impacts people, that people care about, messages that are important. And I get to work with entrepreneurs in the health, wellness, marketing, business, and parenting spaces to help them bring their voices to the mic, elevate their niche, elevate their industry, and grow their show. Now, I also have an online course. It's called Start and Launch Your Podcast in 8 weeks, and you can find a link to that course in the show notes below. So, what makes me qualified to sit here and chat with you about podcasting? I've been in the industry since 2018, and I'll share a little bit about my journey of getting here and how it all happened. So I want to take you back to 2018 and when my podcast journey started. My now husband, then boyfriend, and I had a super cute apartment. We had such a cute dog. We had everything that we could have ever asked for, anything that I could have ever wanted, to be honest with you. And I couldn't help feeling so empty. I felt lost. I felt discouraged in every area of my life. I was working, jobs that didn't leave me fulfilled. I was, just so miserable in so many areas. I hated who I was. I was very gossipy. I was very judgmental. I was very, just not nice. I was, hating so much of who I was. I know hate is such a strong word, but I truly, honestly didn't really like anything about myself. I didn't like the way that I looked. I didn't like my body. I didn't like, where I was in life. I was just so miserable. And I remember complaining, and I was complaining so much. And my husband, now husband, then boyfriend, said to me, if you're so unhappy, why don't you do something about it? And I honestly hated him in that moment for saying that, but also it's the beginning of what sparked an entire journey for me, because I really started to think about, if I'm so unhappy, why would I not just do something about it? And so with this in mind, I started on a whole journey of self-discovery. 2018 Simona and today's Simona are very different people. So I started on a journey to self-discovery. I didn't know exactly where I was going to go. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but all I knew is that I could not let this stay the way that it's been going. I was thinking to myself how destructive my behaviors were and the way that I acted was. And, I just started looking online and I was like, okay, I guess people who help you change your life are life coaches, right? And so I was like, okay, let me find a life coach. So I started searching all over the internet, all over Google, and I was trying to find a life coach. And I ended up stumbling upon this therapist. Now, if you've ever listened to any of my podcasts in the past before, I have another podcast. It's called Happiness Happens. If you've ever listened to that podcast before, you will know that I'm a huge fan of therapy. I believe that it is an incredible tool to help us grow, to help us evolve, to help us process our trauma, all the experiences that we go through and make sense of them. So if you're not into it, bye. No, I'm just kidding. No judgment. If you're not into it, that's totally cool, but I hope you listen with an open mind. So anyways, I had started to see this therapist and we were going through all these different sessions and she was asking me, she's like, okay, but what feels so empty for you? And I was like, I just feel like there's more. I feel like there's more to life than day in, day out, same thing all day, every day, nothing changes. It's like Groundhog Day. I was like, if this is life, this is not living. This is not living. So as we went through, I think we worked together for about 5 months. And in that journey, in that process, I learned so much about myself. I learned about, why I was so unhappy, why I was feeling so unfulfilled. I learned about, that it's okay to be fearful, it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to not have all the answers. It was very challenging for me as well because I've always been someone who's very bubbly. I've always been someone who, people like to be in my energy. And I do not say this in a conceited way. People say this to me all the time. And it's a very hard place to be in because if you're not okay, people are like, well, what's wrong with you? You're the happiest person I know. How could you be sad? How could you be upset? And so I kept feeling like I was letting people down when I was unhappy, or if I wasn't, super bubbly and super outgoing and super this, super that people wouldn't want to be around me anymore. Right. And so it's a very hard thing to process and help other people understand that, you know what? No, I'm not okay. And it's okay that I'm not okay. And there's nothing you can do to fix it. It's my journey, my process. I have to go through it. Right. So I started thinking to myself, if I felt this way, and if I've learned all of these different things over the last few months, there has to be somebody else out there who feels the same way. There has to be somebody else who doesn't feel like enough. There has to be somebody else who feels alone. There has to be somebody else who feels like they are just not getting it and they don't know why. And so I started putting pen to paper and thinking about how could I help other people who are just like me not feel so alone, right? I wanted people to feel heard and understood and cared for and valued and supported and loved, even if I didn't know them in person. So I started and I set out on my podcasting journey. My husband bought me my very first mic, and I joke around all the time that if he didn't buy me that microphone, I probably would have never started, and I wouldn't even know where I would be today. So kudos to you, babe. And so I started on this podcast journey. I started recording content about fear and failure and heartbreak and sadness and happiness and joy, and discovering who we are innately as people, as human beings. What brings us joy? What do we desire? How do we access that deeper sense of purpose without it being all fluff, without, thinking that we can never actually have those things, without just going through the movements of life every single day and actually living in those moments every single day. So I launched my show in January of 2019. And at first it was just me talking into the mic, and it was just me sharing, all the stuff that I had learned, and people actually started to listen. And I have to caveat this and tell you, I had no community around me at that time, like an online community. I didn't use social media. I didn't like social media. To be honest, I don't love social media still today, but that is what it is. I'll just drop that. But I ended up deciding to publish these episodes anyways, without a community. But then you know what happens? The community starts to build, and it starts to come, and your people start to find you, and your message starts to resonate deeply, and you start to impact people on a significant level. And then what happened was those solo episodes turned into guest interviews. And then those guest interviews turned into new opportunities. And those new opportunities turned into lifelong friends. And the whole journey has brought me into podcast production today. So while I sit here and we share all of this content with you, I want you to remember that where you're starting is so important. You need to be in this moment right now, because there are lessons and there are things that you haven't experienced yet that are going to elevate you and take you to that next level. And as much as we try, and I know I try this so often, I just want to know how things play out. Unfortunately, we don't always get to know that. And so this brings me to where we are today. Today, we're launching this new podcast. I'm so excited. There's a team that has helped me bring this show to life. There's a community of people who are excited to learn. And it all started by tapping into my fear, my anger, and my disappointment for who I was as a person, and choose to transform it. So I am a big believer that our next step is right around the corner from our next choice. We get to choose how we want that next moment to go. We get to choose the outcome that we desire every single day. And while there are a lot of things that are out of our control, what we can control is what's within us. What we can control is how we react, how we show up, right? The community that we build, the message that we share, the podcast that we create, right? So all of those different pieces are part of your journey. They're part of your story. And they're exactly what is going to bring you to where you need to be. Now, it's funny that we're launching this podcast officially. It's crazy to me. When I think back to launching the Happiness Happens podcast, there's about 1,000,005 things that I would do so differently. But the truth of the matter is, I wouldn't have any experience to share with you, and I wouldn't be able to sit here with perspective and knowledge and things that I've learned and be able to shed light on some of those areas for you. Now, the truth of the matter is, I never envisioned myself as a podcast producer. I've always worked in the media. I've always worked in communications and marketing in those different areas, but I never actually envisioned myself running a production company. And now that we're here, I get to pinch myself every single day and remind myself that we get to produce some incredible freaking podcasts. Just saying. One thing I did know that I wanted was to work for myself. I did know that I didn't want to be spending, trading my time for money. I didn't want someone else to tell me where I need to show up and when I need to show up. I didn't want somebody to be able to tell me, no, you can't go for a walk on your lunch break, or, make sure you are answering at 12 a.m. on a Saturday while you're on vacation. Those are real life things that happened to me in the corporate world. I had a terrible corporate experience. Not all of it was terrible, but I had some horrible bosses, especially towards the end of my corporate career. Oh my goodness. Anyways, I digress. I will not go into it, but it was just absolutely wild. And the things that I experienced being in the corporate world, the politics, the games, the deceit, the spitefulness, the nastiness from people, colleagues, people who say that they, support you and are your friends, those different things that I learned from that is that we get to choose our environment and how we show up every single day, regardless of how other people feel about us. And so when I was working in corporate, I knew for a fact that I did not want to live my life according to somebody else's rules. And so I tested. I tested again, tried one thing. I was a life coach for a few years. I fell out of love with it. And then it always came back to podcasts. So here we are today. As it relates to podcasting is now live. You know a little bit about my journey and my story and exactly how I've gotten here today. Of course, there's a million things in between that I could talk to you about. That's not the intention of this show. But if you do have questions, feel free to send me a message on Instagram, send me an email, or connect with me on Patreon. All of those links are in the show notes. I want to leave you with a little reminder. And the reminder today is that you can do whatever it is you want to do in your life, regardless of what other people say about it. Regardless of the stories that other people put and project onto you. Even if you feel like you will not make an impact, I promise you that you will. And I want you to remember this as you're going through your podcasting journey, but also through your life journey. You have to do the things that fuel your soul, that make you excited, and that make you feel alive every single day. There is no set way to do things. There is no set way to do life, quote unquote. And there's just no rules, right? The way that we learn is through trial and error. The way that we show up is through trial and error. And the way that we get to our most authentic selves is by digging into those really hard moments and pulling ourselves out of them. So my goal with this new podcast and with all of these series is to give you tangible tips and tools and tricks that you can take after listening to every single episode and implement them immediately. We are sharing all of the things that we wish we did differently to save you the headache so that you don't have to make those same mistakes. It's kind of like having a coach without even having to pay for it. Again, if you have specific questions that you would like me to answer, I do so over in my Patreon community. So feel free to become a patron. Submit your questions, and I am happy to respond to all of them. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, for watching this on YouTube, for leaving a comment and leaving a review and rating of the show. I am so, so grateful for you, and I am truthfully so excited to be on this journey right now. I cannot wait to see how this unfolds, where this all will go, and what this podcast will bring. But I do know for a fact that we will learn everything that you need to learn as it relates to podcasting.